Well, good evening. My name is Gwendolyn Fernandez. I am the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Harwood Museum of Art, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's evening, Remote Possibilities, Envisioning Climate Futures with artists Marina Zurkow and Andrea Polli. So this virtual program is inspired by our current exhibition, Remote Possibilities, Digital Landscapes from the Thoma Collection, currently on view at the Harwood Museum, the University of New Mexico in Taos, New Mexico. You can see it in person through February 27th. Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few organizations that made this exhibition and this program possible. We are grateful to the Thoma Foundation for sharing stunning works of art by an internationally renowned group of artists, and to New Mexico Arts for their generous support of the exhibition and its related programs. Additionally, we'd like to extend deep gratitude to virtual visiting artist Viva, who is a sponsor of this program. I will drop links to these organizations in the chat in just a moment so you can learn more about their work. Before I hand things off to Nicole Dial-Kay, our curator, who will begin our conversation, I'd like to share just a few Zoom webinar logistics for tonight's program. We will run approximately 1 hour in length this evening. As you have questions, please do add those to the Q&A feature, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. You'll submit those questions. We'll get to them as soon as we can, and we will certainly save some time at the end of the program this evening to answer any questions that you might have. Finally, I will hand things over to Nicole. Nicole Dial-Kay is the Harwood's Curator of Exhibitions and Collections. She was formerly the Senior Director of Arts and Programming at Breckenridge Creative Arts. She has also worked with the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, CU Art Museum, the Denver Art Museum, Alaska State Museums, St. Louis Art Museum, and Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis. She earned degrees from the University of Colorado, Boulder, the University of Missouri, and Southern Illinois University. Nicole, take us away.
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to kick this conversation off tonight with just a little bit of framing around the program, and then I'll largely let our speakers take it away. So the exhibition that brings us all together here tonight is Remote Possibilities, Digital Landscapes from the Thoma Foundation collection, and that's up for only 1 more week. So if you are in the New Mexico area, I strongly suggest stopping by and seeing it. This exhibition brings together 6 of the world's foremost contemporary artists, engaging the tradition of landscape art using digital technologies. And those artists include Jean Girard, Kent Monkman, Bruce Nauman, Jennifer Steinkamp, Leo Villarreal, and one of our featured guests tonight, Marina Zurkow. Marina's work in the exhibition, which I've chosen as my background tonight, is entitled Mesocosm, Wink, Texas. And this work presents a dystopian ecosystem emerging around a fracking-induced sinkhole in a Texas oil field. The work features a lot of natural beauty, like monarch butterflies, juxtaposed with some really nefarious scenes like weather events and hazmat-wearing humans who are monitoring the site the whole time. In the artist's own words, the work portrays specific places populated by real and fantastic animals, people, plants, and weather, ultimately investigating what constitutes nature. The work is an animated landscape that develops and changes over a 146-hour duration in response to algorithmic rules. Like geological time, the temporal scale of the animation always outlasts us. And I think Marina will probably speak a bit more about that later and give us some more details. Quick bios on both of our speakers. Marina first, media and participatory practice artist Marina Zurkow connects people to nature, culture tensions, and environmental messes, offering humor and new ways of knowing, connecting, and feeling. She uses life science, materials, and technologies, including food, software, animation, clay, and other biomaterials to foster intimate multi-species and geophysical connections. She works as a founding member of several collaborative initiatives, including Making the Best of It, Nimble Foods for Climate Change, Dear Climate, Climoji, and Investing in Futures. Zurkow is a 2011 Guggenheim Fellow and received grants from NYFA, NYSCA, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Creative Capital. She's currently a mentor at Bennington College in the Center for the Advancement of Public Action and a professor at ITP Tisch School of the Arts. She is represented by Bitforms Gallery and resides in the Hudson Valley, New York. Andrea Polli is an environmental artist working at the intersection of art, science, and technology. She's created and presented public artworks at 25 locations, including a wind-powered lightwork covering the Rachel Carson Bridge in Pittsburgh, a permanent lightwork for the University of Utah, and building scale works presented in the cities of San Jose, California, Charlotte, North Carolina, Detroit, Michigan, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Germany, and Croatia. She holds an MFA in Time Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a PhD in practice-led research from the University of Plymouth in the UK. Polli is also the Mesa del Sol Endowed Chair of Digital Media at the University of New Mexico and directs the Social Media Work Group, a lab at the university's Center for Advanced Research Computing. As an educator, Polli has created student-centered professional development, theory, practice, and field-based courses and experiences for practicing artists, engineers, and makers. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now is usually when I'd ask people to applaud, but we'll have to do a virtual imagining of applause. So let's kick this off at the very beginning. Where did you both intersect with one another, and where did you intersect with New Mexico?
Well, I have to say, I'm just so thrilled to reconnect with Marina. It's been, I think, almost 10 years since we were so honored to have Marina do a very influential work at the ICEA Symposium, the International Symposium for Electronic Art, which happened across New Mexico in 2012. So yay, I'm so happy to be talking to you again, and just have been following your work for all that time, and especially so happy that it's connected through that we're connected through the Thoma Foundation collection as well.
Yeah, thanks Nicole and Gwen and Andrea for coming. I'm again super honored to be here and to be part of the conversation. Andrea, do you want to just give a little bit of context about the times we've met, and then I can dig into some of the details of tying this, especially the project that's on display, to the work in New Mexico as I can?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we were trying to piece this together, backstage in the green room before this started. So I think that we first met each other when we were both living in New York and both connected to I-Beam, which is an amazing art and technology center that was at the time in Chelsea, a huge building in Chelsea. It's now in Brooklyn, was still going strong. And yeah, then, so that was probably back in 2008-ish, 2007. And then I ended up moving out to New York, or to New Mexico, to work at UNM, and worked with a team of people who put together the ICEA Symposium. And we invited Marina along with many other artists, but your work was really, I think really engaged with the community in such a deep and wonderful way, and was really it really influenced people. The artists, emerging artists. I think it's become, in my view, it's become kind of a model for how to engage with community. It really changed people's ideas and their mentalities about how you maybe should approach working with a community. And I was just so interested in maybe if you wouldn't mind like going back to that time and sort of reflecting on how you had an approach that was so different.
No, I'm so excited to hear this. You make work, and there's a whole thing in site-specific art about parachuting in and thinking that you're speaking for somebody. And I was very aware of that at the time. And I have like 5 things I want to say simultaneously. I think I'm going to share some slides for a second and just talk a little bit about informal ethnography work and sort of what I learned. So just real quick, because Nicole's head is in front of the sinkhole, I want to show you the sinkhole. I stuffed this back in here in the last minute because this is a representation of a real sinkhole called the Wink Sink in the town of Wink, Texas, near Odessa Midland in the what used to be the Land-Based Petroleum Center. And I discovered this when I was still at home before I had been given this grant for a 2-week research trip to West Texas. This was part of a suite of 14 or so projects that I ended up producing with the good graces of the Guggenheim, for which I'm eternally grateful that I got that grant and was supported to do this work. So you can see in the left a little black spot, which looks nothing like the rest of the landscape if you're tuned to pattern recognition. That is one of 2 sinkholes that opened up on land, private oil company land. And after much effort, I got the county commissioner of Wink to allow me onto the land to photograph this sinkhole, which you can see on the right is this really beautiful event that looks like it could have taken millions of years to form, but it has been 5 years and it was ever growing and tearing up highways like a small monster. So the inspiration of being there and getting to meet these people and going through a lot of gateways and resistances to letting me on the land was one of the first encounters I had really seriously with contentious, suspicious communities that I needed to really engage with as an outsider. And so I spent 2 weeks and I did a lot of research, and what I had come down to West Texas with as a vision was utterly transformed by the people that I met. And the work really was indebted to the graciousness and generosity of people for being willing to talk to me, whether they agreed with me or not. Many times we did not agree, and I had this feeling often of laying our guns down at the door and having these conversations. So that was really amazing. So then the next year, it was the next year, I was invited, I applied for the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance Mexican Gray Wolf Reintroduction residency through Andrea's great organizing. I was blown away by the quality and the interdisciplinarity of the opportunities in New Mexico at the time. And I went on a 2-week research trip to the Gila, stayed in Silver City at a wonderful photographer, Michael Berman's house, he and his partner's house, and was on the road constantly for 2 weeks, photographing and interviewing people. And after this, I went back to New York and engaged a former student of mine, Christy Lease, to work with me to conceptualize a set of projects. So here's the Gila on the left. This is the boundaries of the Gila and Apache forest in which this experimental population of wolves is allowed to roam. It's 4 million acres, and there are roughly 120 wolves. Very contentious. The wolves, you could say, are perceived by many in the community as the federal government, who are legislating how ranchers should comport themselves and allow for wolves to be inside of the ecosystem, especially around their cows. So it was, again, one of those things where I came with an opinion. I had done a lot of research and study, and ended up with some amount of modifications, and then also working with a nonprofit whose aims in part were to make peace with this really contentious set of stakeholders on both sides of the line. So the project was a speculative design project. You can see here, one of our research outputs was looking at the amount of people who were applying for compensation from cattle that were killed by wolves. And that's the only kind of if a wolf kills your cattle, you get $1,500. But the claims were something, I think it was 75% of the claims were not in the end wolf depredation. They were other causes, which you can see in this visualization. So part of my interest was always like giving fun access to people to understand complexities of these issues. So Christy and I ended up making a full cattle armor system. So the proposition was, instead of trying to get rid of the wolves or controlling the wolves, why don't farm ranchers arm their cattle? Since the cattle are essentially living on allotments, on rented land from the Bureau of Land Management, and often not under supervision of animal husbandry practitioners. The cattle have to fend for themselves, which is a big reason why people want the wolves removed from the landscape. So let's let the wolves live because they're so tremendously beneficial to the landscape, but maybe we need to arm the cattle. So this was a pretty provocative project. I had originally wanted to put billboards up in the Catron County area in the Gila, and New Mexico Wilderness Alliance said, like, please don't do this. You can't do this because we're really trying to make peace, not more enemies. We don't need to escalate this problem. So the work ended up in a gallery in 516 Arts in Albuquerque. It was really wonderful to be part of the exhibition. And some of the outputs were a collar that in the cowbell was an Arduino, and in this walking stick was another high frequency emitter. And the collar produced a disparate collection of songs and sounds of throwing up and coughing and elephant roars and get along little doggy and like all kinds of music that were supposed to disrupt. They were supposed to continually produce novelty to startle the wolf, right? So the piece on the right is an image of the map of the Gila area, the contentious area, and then it's a mosaic of all the different agents who are part of and stakeholders who are part of this problem. So I think
and the bags, and that armored cow was on the bags, so everybody who was part of the conference was walking around with this image on it. It's just so really viral. It was really great. But can I ask you, I'm just curious, like how do you lay your guns down, and why do you think that's something that, you've been able to do with so many artists are just, they would just walk away. They would just talk to people who agree with them.
Well, and some people wouldn't talk to me at all. Some people said, you're an outsider. I absolutely don't want to talk to you at all. I'm very grateful for people's time and to tell me their histories and tell me their feelings about the land. I don't live there. These are active working people who have, in many instances, 100-year ties to New Mexico through their families. They're settlers. I did, and not all of them. I didn't get to speak to many Indigenous people. And of course, my own practices and consciousness about whom I speak to has changed in the last 10 years. But at the time, I was mostly focusing on those who were using BLM land to ranch cow-calf operations. And I thought it was really important to hear what they had to say, not just to formulate an opinion that came from reading thesis papers or sort of larger systemic understandings of, like, let's say Aldo Leopold's perspectives on the importance of a wolf in the landscape, or just, I also talked to a lot of fish and wildlife people. And the thing is, if you don't have buy-in from the ranchers, nothing's going to change. That's really the truth. And so to shorthand that question, I'll leap to the end. The terrifying thing was, after the show, I had to go back to Silver City and give a talk at the regional college. And much to my surprise, there were a lot of ranchers in the audience. And I was pretty nervous about presenting this project. And the highest compliment I could be paid was, we don't agree with you, but we think you were fair. We think you were fair. And I think that idea of fairness is underrated in doing research and exploration, because you don't really know what you're going to find, or how, the connections between your own desires to make something, your outputs, and the context in which they're received are all dynamic forces. And I think being really alert to where things are best fit is important. I didn't feel like a kind of yes men approach was going to be effective, and was certainly not going to be in the service of New Mexico Wilderness Alliance's agenda. So I also had to think about it as a partnership, right? I was in partnership with a nonprofit that had given me this opportunity to do this work. So what was I going to give to the community that was going to be of meaning? And that's what all yields to laying your guns down at the door, is that confluence of complexity, like very complex, textures of life and meaning making. So yeah.
I think there's, I'll just share one slide because the way you're talking about things, it makes me realize something that maybe I didn't really realize about New Mexico and also about projects in general, because I think reflecting on some of my own projects, I think that art projects, curatorial projects that are more open-ended, like this project that you were working on with the wool, there wasn't like an expected outcome. And those for me allow so much exploration and an openness to learning that is really, I can see a big contrast between that and other kinds of projects. And I just, I wanted to show this slide because I really think this project for me was sort of my entree into, what New Mexico is about. And it was supported by New Mexico Public Art. And this is my team, my lab students, and at the time, and Vinaya Yazzie, who's a Navajo artist. And we are at a mutton shop of not Navajo, but a friend of Navajo, in the Four Corners area, in what's called the checkerboard area. And we did an audio tour, taking visitors with their cell phones through and across Navajo Nation and past two of the largest coal-fired power plants that exist in the country. They don't provide power to Navajo Nation at all. They are providing power to Phoenix and, New Mexico, of course, parts of California. We interviewed two medicine men and activists from the community, and worked with a lot of members of the community to make this audio tour, which took about a half an hour from Bennington College to this mutton shop, where this person was actually putting up billboards about stopping the power plants. At the time, there was plans to put up a third power plant. But yeah, it was really to have that freedom and that openness on the part of the curators or the project itself, where it was, the project was allowed to be open-ended enough to create that space for learning about what's happening. It was a huge eye-opener for me. I mean, just to say, when I first moved to New Mexico, I was looking at the landscape and, everything was so nice. And I'm like, where are the projects? Where are the poor people? And when you enter the reservations, it's really shocking. Mm-hmm. And so many challenges that, Vinaya talked to me about trying to start an art center, and that, it had to be approved by the BIA. It had to be, go through all these hoops just to do anything.
I think this is a good jumping off point maybe for our next question about art and activism. This is certainly a conversation that's been held by a lot of artists working in your field, but we've talked about approaching it just a little bit differently. So the question is, what does it mean to you both to approach the topic of the environment with both the lens of activism and activation? And how do you measure movement within those spheres? I've stumped you.
Andrea, do you want to show some pieces first this time? You want me to? I go either way.
Go for it, Marina.
Okay.
Activism and activation. Yeah, that's a huge question.
Okay. So people want to know about metrics. I'm not going to talk about metrics. I'm on a refusal. I refuse to talk about this. All right. And I don't think that even with a project like Climoji, this is a two sets of emoji that were made for in 2017 with a collaborator of mine, Vinyata Pani, that we have probably 20,000 downloads of at this point or more. And that's a lot of metrics, but because we have no idea how they're used in the world, I really don't feel like that is significant. Yeah. The only thing it showed me was that there was a hunger for some humor in the climate discourse. That's the one thing that I would feel like my hypothesis was proved correct, that we need shorthand, we need funny visual language, we need something invitational to extend the discourse perhaps beyond our comfort zones, or to have material to preach to the choir in productive ways. All right, so I don't consider this activism. I do think that kind of affective, emotional activation is much more what my stock and trade is. Humor, invitation to connect, like with it on an emotional level, with things that are difficult, unpleasant, things that are hard to communicate about, complex systems issues around the environment and around climate change specifically. And I've kind of had for 12 years, like by any means necessary, I will try and provide opportunities for participation and connection for people. That's the most I can do. So I just show this really quickly. And then another project that's been now almost, it's actually earlier than 2014. It's almost 10 years. I've been part of a collective called Dear Climate. And we've produced over 80 posters that are agitprop style, quick read posters that are, again, I'm really interested in the framework of an invitation that I learned from my friend Aaron Lansman. There's a wonderful theater maker. What is the invitation that you're offering to people who are going to encounter your work? And so I like the open-endedness of this. Their audio works. These were installed in a variety of different contexts. This was a fancy one at Storm King. First issue show Storm King has ever done was on the climate, and I don't think they've necessarily done issue shows since. This was a walking curriculum on the campus of Appalachian State College that was installed in 2020. There's 13 three-way signposts, and they're really connected to literature, science, what's happening in the buildings, poetry, all kinds of stuff that then could be extended through the classroom to make these signposts alive. I'll leave on that one.
I love what you're saying, and this idea of the invitation. I can share maybe one of the first works that someone said to me, like, "Oh, are you being radicalized?" But this idea of humor and an invitation was a project that I actually did in conjunction with I-Beam called Cloud Car, a car covered in a cloud, using a mist system, kind of like a play on Diller and Scafidio's Blur Building. And people would, the idea was to get people to think about it in New York City. If they had to drive, what could they do to reduce their emissions? And, we really had, when we showed this around, we really had people driving up to the car and saying, what is it? Even New York's bravest, the fire department, what's going on? And then we hand them this fact sheet and they're like, oh, thank you. And so that's that disarming and that invitation. I love to show this slide because the fire truck put the Cloud QR sticker on there. It's my proudest art moment. But yeah, kind of that sense of humor about what you're trying to say can be really, can again, just be disarming. Again, like putting down your guns is like such the awesome metaphor for tonight, I think.
I love that project. It's awesome. Also, I'm sure a lot of people in New York were like, your car is on fire.
Right.
What are you doing being so calm?
Andrea, do you want to talk a little bit about the bridge project also?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that's also, I've been jumping around from where my slides were. So that's probably about, maybe 19 or so years ago now, while I was in New York, I participated in a project called New York 2050. It came out of after 9/11. And I mean, I think that's another context, Marina, that we can riff on together, is like how we were both kind of there at that post 9/11 moment. But New York 2050 came out as an initiative to envision a new New York and far enough in the future for really wild things to happen. So my contribution to that, as well as helping to organize it, was to kind of think about the bridges as energy producing, grids, microgrids, and took that project pretty far and showed emails at IBEAM from the CEO of the power company saying, well, we're interested, but we need a 2-year payback on the energy and stuff. But then I was lucky enough, looking at vertical turbines and stuff. But I was lucky enough 15 years later to get this opportunity in Pittsburgh to do this project, which took it to the next level in that custom designed local wind power production company, what was called a nanogrid, lots of information for people to understand what was going on, just 16 turbines powering an entire animated kind of story created about climate change and showing the wind power potential on those bridges. And we were giving back energy to the grid. From day one, we used a lot less, we created a lot more energy than we used for that project. But what was really crazy about that project is we had been in Paris doing another project during COP21. Historic climate agreement is signed, and this piece is up. And we get a new president that immediately pulls out of that Paris climate change day one, and then is sending this tweet out saying, I care more about Pittsburgh than Paris. The mayor of Pittsburgh is, not happy about it. Says we want to, follow the Paris Climate Accord. We're Pittsburgh. We are, technologically advanced, doing amazing work. And I got a call. I'm back in New Mexico. I get a call from the mayor's office, and we're able to turn the bridge green with our cell phones for that weekend, in solidarity really with the people of Pittsburgh. So, that's a kind of an accidental, I feel like it's an accidental activism in a way, when people who are activists, pick up on your work and what you're trying to do or say, and they, take it that much further.
Well, sometimes you're giving tools to activists. And I think in the case of the whole bridge, what's so inspiring is it's a model for making art do things in the world. And I mean, it's not the only one. I know there's been, wastewater treatment art that highlights such things, or might even clean the water in some cases. But did the bridge project influence any other artworks that became both that beautiful and also doing something like you're leveraging, the natural, forces of wind on the bridge and creating energy?
I mean, I would say even before that, there was, there's been Land Art Generator Initiative, has asking for beautiful, energy production, but I feel it hasn't been enough yet in the U.S. There's a lot of, not a lot, but there's projects in Europe where power companies are supporting public artworks, and especially technological ones that are visualizing the energy being produced and CO2 being saved and all those kinds of things. But I haven't seen that enough in the US. So I don't know if Kit Carson is listening.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
So I think both of you have demonstrated that you are doing these really wide-ranging interdisciplinary collaborations, including working with scientists on these really complicated research efforts and production of data sets. Can you talk to us about that exercise of collaboration and how it functions in both of your artistic practices?
Marina, please, I'm dying to hear about what you've been doing.
Well, are we collapsing this into the ocean question? Because then I can just, yeah, okay, great. I'm just going to show some things that sort of exemplify some of that. Whoopsie. Where'd you go? Hold, please. Sorry about that. Lost my slides. Okay. Bound to happen.
Perils of the digital programming.
Oh yeah, whatever. As I was saying before, everybody just commit to making a mess and you'll be fine. Dare to be seamless. Dare to be see me. Okay, so just, I think since we're collapsing this, Andrea and I have some other, we work in sort of interesting parallel universes, or at least distant cousins in our work. And I think we could say that we've been recently interested in planet ocean in some way. And so I've been very committed to working on issues of the ocean since 2014, like fairly deeply. I'm not showing my earlier work, which was on logistics and understanding ocean as a flat superhighway of capital, moving capital around the world, which was devastating and led to a lot of other kinds of projects because it feels so insurmountable to get beyond that idea of both like this Pangea of capitalism. So I more recently got to start working on oceans and how we perceive the ocean in all the different ways we do. And so this is a project called Oceans Like Us. It's a suite of works that are focused on either, you know, loving, being fantasizing about, or polluting, or getting to know, or extracting stuff from the ocean. So we have lots of silos that we consider the ocean through. And so this work has been installed in a few different instantiations. This is actually in San Diego, where I'm now residing for another week. This is the installation of it amidst a lot of ocean debris, and trying to think about what does it mean to connect multisensorily to this material that's really out of sight and in many ways out of mind, or is always sort of considered in contrast to our deep love for this ocean. And I actually would contend that these things need to be brought more closely together, as Zizek might say, about, you know, really thinking of the environment as not something in the past that was ever pristine, but going through love into some new space of care. So we did, as part of that exhibit, Anna Rose Hopkins and I have written like a 30-minute immersive audio piece about becoming the ocean. And you go on this 30-minute kind of, the framework is an audio meditation, but you become a sea cucumber, and then you transform into marine snow, and then you get eaten by a whale, and then you become the whale, and then you're subject to all this pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really great to have 30 people in this space, socially distanced, listening, and everybody had a COVID test. This was just last Friday. Everyone had a COVID test on site and was able to kind of come in and do this. And in tandem with the listening, Anna and I have been working, she's an actress and a chef and a writer, and we've been working for years trying to metabolize climate change through food. So this is actually an edible food display that's an undersea glow-in-the-dark display on sea salt. There's a little bit of, there's shellfish, very little shellfish, even though there's shells, and a lot of vegan sea cucumbers, and all the glow-in-the-dark elements are candy that are edible. And then, so this was a donor event here. You can see kelp hanging from the rafter here, just lots of kombu hanging down and scenting the space. And then we did a listening session on the beach on Sunday. And this was completely self-motivated. They were sitting on the beach and suddenly one person got up and walked in the water, and then everybody got up and walked in the water. So it was kind of a beautiful event with, like, there was sort of a spontaneous choreography of listening to this work. And the work you listen to on headphones, but at present, you have to listen to it with other people. We're not releasing the audio to be listened to like by yourself. We feel like it's important that people listen together to this work. And then lastly, I'll just show this one quick picture. This is Dear Climate's mini hole like mini golf hole in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, as part of a climate change mini golf 18-hole course. We built this thing called Whale Fall Feast, which is traditionally when a whale dies and falls to the bottom of the ocean. It is literally food for 100 years for a tremendous amount of animals in the benthic zones and deeper. And so we built the whale in great part out of marine debris. And there was a whole menu of like courses that happen over 100 years that these animals are eating, sort of like as if this is a restaurant. So, oh yeah, one more, Jellyfish Jerky Shack on the UCLA campus. Nobody really thinking about single serve snacks as a bajillion-dollar industry of plastic waste and materials. That was a really interesting conversation to serve. We served jellyfish as a dried jerky, and it was flavored. You had 5 choices of flavoring from the 5 regions in the world most at risk of sea level rise. So trying again to stimulate conversation and also put things in your body that will remain a kind of more memorable experience. So you're contacting these conversations. So,
Marina, I want to ask you, you know, something that I think is so strong in your work is this idea of kind of transformation and the temporal element that can be so stretched, you know, the piece at the Harwood that is always, you know, constantly changing and you know, that idea about time. And I'm wondering, because I think this is something that scientists are often really struggling with, especially related to climate change. Like, how do you communicate these temporal things that are so big, or these spatial things that are so big? Like, how do things come together for you? Is it just really intuitive, or, you know, what's your process?
No, it is intuitive, but I do think, as much as I am always interested in decentering the human, if you can't kind of provide a human scale or something having to do with the limits of our own sensory apparatuses, like sense of taste or smell or touch, you kind of are missing the opportunity for like actually, like I would use the word metabolizing or under knowing in ways that are bigger than a text or a video, right? Which is such a kind of limited way of knowing. So it is intuitive, but I have also been very like structuralist about my approach of mapping temporalities, right? So mapping, so 200 million years it takes for marine microorganism to become gushing petrochemical, you know, gushing oil and then petrochemicals can be mapped to a long dinner. There is a way, we have done this with the same chef and her partner, you know, really thinking through, okay, break down the steps. What is there a mapping? Sometimes it fails, but you can actually do a kind of structuralist exploration of that stuff. So I hope it was clear. I work with a lot of collaborators. I didn't have to enumerate the science or chefs or scholars. I mean, it's a big soup of people who are really important to contribute to this. Yeah.
Andrea, I'm hoping you'll talk about one of my favorite projects, the Antarctica project.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll share some things. I mean, I think that's, you know, was probably one of the experiences that I've had where I've sort of had the most number of collaborators or scientists in one place to work with. And so this is a team of scientists that I worked with at the Taylor Glacier in the Dry Valleys. And I interviewed about 30 or so scientists. This was also integrated into my PhD work. So I was kind of writing a lot about this as well, and ended up doing a couple of different projects from that 7-week experience in Antarctica residency with the National Science Foundation. One was Ground Truth, a short video about, you know, what does it mean to, why are we having humans with our complicated metabolisms go down to a place that, you know, is not habitable by humans, and, you know, do all we can to keep them alive, and when we have machines that can take those measurements. And then an audio CD, a full-length album called Sonic Antarctica, which combines soundscape recordings and the voices of scientists. This was a time, 2007, 2008, when a lot of scientists were talking about the war on science from the US government, and sonifications of the data that was being collected by the scientists. And then a book, whoops, I can find it, a book called Far Field Digital Culture, Climate Change and the Poles, which has a number of different contributors. Jane Marshing and I edited this compilation of kind of the contemporary group of artists working with digital technologies, going to the poles, the Antarctic and the Arctic, to address some of these issues.
Before you go too far, could you just offer why you think ground truthing is important? Because I bet you there's some funny intersection around epistemologies in there.
That's, yeah. I mean, the number one thing was that nobody was going to get on a plane that there wasn't somebody looking up at those clouds to see if there was going to be a storm. You know, nobody would trust really the instruments to tell them if it was safe. You know, that was kind of the number one thing. So it's like, you know, our bodies, we need another body to tell us if it's safe. I think that's, you know, you just made me think of a really weird thing, is that like part of the big challenge that we're having right now with COVID and our current situation is that we're not, you know, we don't have that in the way that we've, you know, always existed to have those bodies around us to tell us it's safe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We could spend another hour on this.
I know.
I have some
that was a big
that are super unformed that have to do with something else, which is the multi-sensory inputs of the body are kind of underestimated, and the machine or the sensor does one thing. And so, you know, the trust is also kind of an unspoken trust in our haptic sensibilities or our perceptual sensibilities that is probably not spoken about that much with regard, you know, in science, but I would wager to guess that many dancers and other arts practitioners would say, yeah, I think that's, you know, there's a lot of hidden stuff that we're losing. And I'm not nostalgic for the body. I just think body has a tremendous place in sensing the world, and not to sort of offload all of that onto our cyborg hands.
Yeah, like what, you know, your work with food, and, you know, I was just reading, I mean, it could be less than 1 part per billion can be detected by our noses of certain chemicals and things. You know, I think we have not scratched the surface on the body's capabilities at this point.
Do you think we want to switch over to some of our questions from the audience at this point? We're about 5 minutes out.
Ooh.
Here, I'll read. So our first one is from Emily, and it's for Marina. Marina, I'm interested in your process of ethnography while doing site-specific work. How do you see your work in the arts and environmental justice intersecting with the field of anthropology?
Gosh, I really don't know how to answer that.
What a smart audience we have.
Yeah, Emily's just pumped out. I only see Emily's name on all these questions. I'm like, whoa, okay, these are great. Since Emily asked other ones, can I defer that one for a moment to at least think about it if there's time? Move on.
Pass.
I'm going to pass for this moment. Sorry.
So question 2 is, how do you two consider audience for your works? Is it specific to each project, or are you always trying to reach the largest common denominator through humor, visual language, etc.?
And you could actually fold her other question I see in here into that, which is about the field of climate science, right? How do you balance detailed explanations with the desire to for the work to speak for itself? I think those are actually really connected, those questions. Andrea, can you see the questions?
I don't see the climate one. Oh, I see it. Okay. Let me look. Yeah, no, that's a huge. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think the work is primary, the encounter with the work is primary, and then you have secondary and tertiary opportunities to reinforce, explain, unpack the work that I do. I want there to be a kind of something in encounter. And the humor, I don't know if I have a large common denominator. Sometimes I'm told I've been told I'm too academic, especially when people read the writing, or too cryptic when people don't read the writing. But one would hope that, humor and yes, humor in the visual language, I am trying to use those to invite people into being curious about what's happening in there. Yeah, it's really hard because a lot of the stuff that I'm dealing with, and I think Andrea also, I won't speak for you, but systemic tangles, systemic messes are just very hard to, and I've always been struggling, how do you make logistics visible, feelable for people? So, but then, it's not, because the buy it now button is that moment of logistics. And it's like so split second, you never have to feel this vast set of systems that are overlapped.
Do you think, Marina, on the audience question, do you, I loved what you were talking about with doing the mappings in time and space. Do you ever really think through the audience when you're making it work, or is that something that kind of comes after? Does that play into your planning?
Oh no, it often plays into my planning unless I'm like, I am going to make a piece first and foremost for myself as this kind of inquiry or exploration. And I don't know where it's going, but a lot of the deep oceans work, the Oceans Like Us work, started as an inquiry. The logistics work, well, they all started as kind of, I'm super curious about how to untangle all of this. But there have been tons of times, I did a lot of work on Newtown Creek. I really had to think about who was going to come to this relatively obscure park along this very polluted creek on the Brooklyn-Queens border, and who was going to listen to this? How was I going to get people to come listen to this? What was the moment of encounter? How was I going to even invite, especially workers around the creek? Whereas, was I going to be able to have any kind of interface with them? Would this be of any interest to the people who mostly populated those spaces? So it really depends on the project and the scope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times the audience is kind of defined by whatever the gig is. If it's a public art project or something, they're already out there. The curators are out there finding that. But I've also found, just one thing we haven't mentioned is that, often the scientists can be part of the audience.
Absolutely. I had 12 interdisciplinary script students come here last week to the show. I'm in Encinitas, actually. They made the journey, and we had really such a satisfyingly amazing conversation. They were in some ways the least looking for the didactics, the most open to sort of considering what's happening centrally. And I'm going to the labs tomorrow. I'm really excited to get to see what they're all doing and to feel that kind of parity between our practices as explorations and, that are really about both curiosity and communication.
So we're about at the end of our time. Let's do our final question, which I think is a great question to end on. Are there any dream projects you two would want to or have talked about collaborating on?
Oh. This is our first opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it would be great to just spend more time, in meat space and consider, some of these issues. But I'm just fascinated and so happy and grateful to have been able to see what you've been up to lately, and the ocean projects are just so amazing.
You should come up to where I live now in the Hudson Valley. So I've been really interested in the connection of this river I live 10 minutes away from, but I've always lived near the river, but the river upstate has just a very different valence than the river in New York, which you can kind of ignore a lot of the time. But it's connection to the oceans. And then how is that sort of connected up through geology into Canada. I mean, there's just a lot of really interesting stuff that could be mapped and explored. And I am trying to start a little really informal, like collaborative residency thing up there.
Nice. And listen to, I'm sure I loved seeing that ocean group, spontaneously listen. That's so important right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole, for facilitating this.
No, thank you both. I think, Gwen, are you?
Everyone, I'm here. I've been here all along. I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Andrea and Nicole, for being part and leading this really fascinating conversation. We went in a lot of very different directions. And it was just really a thrill to get to know more about your practices, your work, and what's coming up in the future. So I just want to thank everybody as we're wrapping up for joining us. We will have another virtual program at the Harwood next month, February 6th, this time related to our exhibition, Remembering the Return of Blue Lake. So I will drop a link to the chat if you'd like to join us for that program. And again, thank you all. We did record the program tonight, so we'll make that available coming up soon. So if anybody didn't catch it and wants to join us at a later date. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Hey, thanks. Have a great evening.
Bye, be well.